You survived the Miami weekend, nailed the speech, and maxed out your credit card in the name of friendship. Now you've got one hangover, 4 pastel dresses, and 0 reasons to wear them again. Sell them on Depop. Just snap a few photos, and we'll take care of the rest. And you at least get some of your dignity, money back. Someone on Depop wants what you've got. Start selling now. Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
Well, what the heck is going on in Albany? Well, maybe Paul Zuber can give us an answer. And Paul Zuber is the Executive Vice President of the Visitors Council of New York State. And, well, Paul Zuber, give us the pulse of the situation. What is going on?
Well, John, they finally have a budget. They finally agreed to a budget here in New York State. And look, like most budgets, there's some good with the budget and there's some bad with the budget. They did make some changes to the climate law that I think will be helpful to businesses and consumers. They made some changes to environmental review procedures that will kind of expedite some housing and some development, make it quicker and easier. They did some stuff on auto insurance that will lower insurance rates, and the governor decided that she was not going to raise taxes on individuals and corporations. But, there is still some issues, right? So we just passed a $268 billion budget, which is the biggest budget in New York State history. And I went back and looked. In 2020, New York's budget was $177 billion. In 2010, it was only $135 billion. So how we've all of a sudden blown up our budget by $100 billion in less than a decade is beyond me. And I think we have to be ready because we're headed for trouble if we keep doing that. And in the budget, New York City got about $2.4 billion. 780 million of it is reoccurring money. But, the problem there is there's no accountability for the money. So we're not in the budget. No one's holding New York City accountable. So in all likelihood, you're probably going to see the same situation that happened this year where New York City is going to come back and say, I need more money. I need you to raise more taxes. I need you to do this because we can't keep operating at this level. So, I always say one of the big problems in New York State is we take 2 steps forward. So we took 2 steps forward with auto insurance reform and fixing the climate law, but then we take 2 steps back because we do things that actually increase costs on consumers. And lastly, I'll say we're coming to the end of the legislative session in here in New York, and I think it's going to be even worse then because what happens is these bills come out in the middle of the night. Nobody knows why they've been put on the floor to vote, why they haven't. And in often cases, no one ever puts down a true accounting of how much that particular piece of legislation is going to cost New Yorkers. So we wake up months from now and we realize, oh, my God, we passed this bill and we said it was going to be no cost to New Yorkers, but it ends up costing New Yorkers more money. The climate law is a perfect example. When Cuomo passed that several years ago, if you look at the bill, it said fiscal impact to be determined. Well, we found out almost 10 years later that the fiscal impact was huge. And that's the problem. New York State, we take 2 steps forward and we take 2 steps backwards. And until we do that, we're always going to be in trouble. We're always going to be wondering why people are leaving the state, why people want to open up businesses in Texas and North Carolina and Florida. The way we do things is kind of backwards, right? Like there's no business that you know of that would not understand the costs of, buying a particular product or putting something out to market and just go by the seat of their pants. And I think often in Albany, we just go by the seat of our pants.
Paul, I mean, you're in Albany mostly, and you are very familiar with upstate. I live in downstate. I live in the city, and I've never seen so many empty stores, not even in the 70s or the 80s, as I see now. I mean, this congestion pricing really hurt a lot of businesses.
Yeah, well, I to the point of what happens at the end of session, nobody ever looks at the domino effect of these things that they do. So to your example, John, you do congestion pricing. No one says to themselves, okay, we're going to increase, costs for people going into Midtown Manhattan. But everybody doesn't think to themselves, well, all these trucks that come in and are bringing, goods to a restaurant, they're going to actually have to pay more money, right? So who's going to pay that? The trucking company's not going to eat that cost. He's going to pass it on to the retailer, who then's going to pass it on to the consumer, right? And we don't look at these things. So when you talk about opening these storefronts that are open in New York, we constantly pass these laws in New York that deal with workers' compensation, that deals with things that, the legislators think are so wonderful and we're going to protect everybody. But in the end, they place the burden on the small business owner, and then the small business owner has no other choice but to pass it on. And when they can't pass it on anymore, they end up closing shop. And it's become so expensive to operate, particularly in New York City, that a lot of people are just throwing up their hands and saying, why, right? And, and people have to realize, and our legislators have to realize, that there are impacts to the bills that you pass. You need to look past the initial goals of a piece of legislation. You have to look at what happens afterwards. And a lot of that is not happening in Albany, and a lot of it's not happening at the city council level as well.
Agree on that. Well, Paul Zuber, let's keep our eyes open and let's see what we come up with. And how do the British say it, how things are going to sort themselves out next week?
Yeah, well, I hope they sort themselves out well, but Albany, it probably isn't. But hopefully it will, John. Hopefully it will.
Thank you, Paul Zuber, and we'll catch up with you again real soon.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thank you.